This is my second conversation with Bob Cooley. In episode 1, we discussed Bob's youth in Chicago and his turmoil with his parents because of his family's poverty. This conversation leads into his years as a young adult and a scholarship at Marquette that does not end well. After a series of odd jobs, he becomes a cop and meets his initial contact with the Chicago outfit. One quick note, if you're listening on Buzzsprout, some of the chapter titles are links to further details on the web about people and places we've discussed. Here we go, Conversation 2 of the Cooley Account. Bob, you told me a very touching story about your mother. You were working 3 to 4 jobs as a 7-year-old. The money you made would go to your mother for collection. You end up going to university and your mother presents you with the bank account of the money that she had saved for you. You were angry in the moment thinking, why do I have to give all this money away? But ultimately your mother did the right thing and had saved this money for you. Your motivation to go work and collect this spare change and these spare dollars and these multiple jobs wasn't something that was foisted upon you by your parents saying, hey, we're strapped here. Bob, you got to go out and bring in some money. It was it was motivated by you having this desire to not eat vegetables, essentially.
I'm taking so I could survive, so I could. There's no, and I'll be honest. I used to steal stuff out of stores because I was hungry, and and I always got worried about getting caught. So that's why I started doing. The other way I would get money too. My father played poker. He had, some police friends of his and other friends. And what I would do every day after they finished up, first thing in the morning, I'd get up and I'd go digging into the couch and find some pennies and nickels and whatever. Once in a while, find a dime. They would fall out of their pockets. The one thing we did almost as a family was collecting newspapers. We'd go out with our little wagons and go up and down the alleys and collect newspapers. And I do remember too, it was $1 a pound she got, but there'd be a truck that would drive up and down the alleys picking up newspapers themselves. But we would store the papers in the garage, and you'd have like the whole wall, and my mother would, bundle them in these bundles, these big bundles. She'd, wrap some like, not string. It was heavier than that, but she would wrap it around, and he would come every so often and almost fill up half a truck, of the papers, from our garage.
As you're progressing through school, are you continuing to work these odd jobs?
Yes, for a while. And in my childhood, you could actually break into 3 different periods. 74th and Vernon, that's when I was, from the time up until I was about maybe 8, 9 years old. And then when we moved to 76th and Langley, that's when I started working, because now 79th Street was a busy street there in the South Side. I remember Oglesby Drugstore was about 2 blocks away, right there in the corner of Langley and 79th Street. I don't remember how I wound up finding Beremus. Beremus was a Greek that had a grocery store, and I don't know how I wound up getting the job there because it was actually about a mile from the house, a little over a mile from the house. The problems I had with that too was the neighborhood. It started turning, the blacks started coming in, and it got to the point where we were one of the last families to move out, and it got to be a problem when I'm driving my bike over to the coming back, especially at night when it's dark. I'd be jumped by 2 or 3 of these black kids who would rob me, and that was the period too when finally I stopped taking it and I began to fight back, and that's when a whole lot of my world changed. I got tired of being, picked on all the time because of, my size. When I would go back and forth on the bike, I would wind up carrying a small baseball bat, and I would fight them off. Got to the point where they'd leave me alone. But prior to that too, even walking to school, we carried our lunch all the time to school. They'd steal my lunch all the time, and I decided to start fighting back. And that's when my whole personality changed in a lot of ways. One of the most bizarre things about my childhood, and and it's jumping forward a little bit. One of the people that I met was a kid named John Began. I write about a little bit about him in the book. That's the one that became a multi-millionaire and all the rest of it. That's the one that I started running around with. When we moved to 76th and Langley, Began's family had moved there in that same area. In fact, lived about a block away from me. And the way we became friends was he beat me. He was a big, tough kid, and he used to pick on me until I started fighting back. What John started doing was arranging fights. When I would come home, Began would be waiting for me there. There was three of us that ran around over there: Ronnie Ballard, John Began, and myself. The three of us, along with a few other guys. After a short period of time, right next to Ronnie Ballard's house, there was a vacant lot, and that's where the fights would be. John would telling all these people about this tough friend of his, who had just moved in the neighborhood. And this lasted for a period of probably about, I'd say, a month and a half. There'd be a fight arranged with different kids from St. Felicitas.
So he was the fight promoter and you were the talent. This must have been, for your ego and your confidence, a really important moment, that these kids were rallying around you as the main event in street fights.
Absolutely. In fact, the way it started was, because I was so small, it would be different ones from the 8th grade or from the 7th grade, and, that were, bigger than me, but not real big. In fact, it went on for about 6 weeks, where every other day when I come home, there's a fight until the police got called, because, somebody lived in the house like next door, and you'd have this group of about probably 20, 25 kids that would meet there, waiting for the fight. John became an unbelievable part, unwittingly, of a lot of the things that transpired. I'm jumping forward a bit, but I think it's really, really important. When John was a wrestler, too, at Mount Carmel. John wound up going to Mount Carmel, same as me. When I graduated, I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to start going out and making some money. In fact, I was dating a girl whose father worked in the steel mills. And my thought was, we might get married, and I'll move into her basement. They had a basement apartment where she lived. In fact, I remember the name, Carol Peterzak. And the next thing I know, I'm contacted by the wrestling coach at Marquette, and wants me to come down there and work out with him and with the kids and possibly get me a scholarship.
And you're talking about, of course, just to put a fine point on it, for those that don't know, you're talking about Marquette University in Milwaukee, north of Chicago.
Right. Now, the only reason they could have known about that, I'm sure, had to be my father. Why would a university know anything about my wrestling abilities? In fact, there were very few Catholic schools that had wrestling teams. I remember Mendel had one, but most of our wrestling was done with the public schools.
Mount Carmel was and remains to this day a powerhouse.
One of the most powerful in the state. I wound up going to Marquette I had a wrestling scholarship. John didn't, but John's parents had a little bit of money. His father was like the opposite of mine. His father was a miserable, nasty drunk. John and I went to Marquette, and while we were at Marquette, the first day I was at Marquette, I met Bill Murphy, who became one of my closest friends. And it turns out Bill Murphy wound up being a public defender and wound up being Frank Wilson's public defender, and that's how I met Frank Wilson.
We'll get to that down the road for sure and tie those strands together.
But anyhow, when I first met Bill Murphy, I don't remember doing that, but he told me the first day I met him, I told him how tough I was. I was living on the jock floor, on the 6th floor at Schrader Hall, and that's when one of the first people I met there was Bill Murphy, and he had gone to Mendel High School, which was our big opponent. Had we met even a couple of weeks before, we would have been fighting because we had all kinds of fights at St. Sabina's, with the Mendel people and the others.
I want to hear about the Marquette years, but let's go back for a moment. What is your perception of the city of Chicago crime? Is the outfit influencing your neighborhood or your household? Is it a topic of conversation, or is it something you don't come upon until much later in life?
Did not as I grew up, even up until, my college years and the rest. Even when I first became a policeman, never had any thoughts at all about any of that. All I knew about was what I would read in the paper, that there was a mafia and that there was, but I knew nothing about any of that.
Yeah, and they weren't controlling your neighborhood. There wasn't a guy on the street corner who you had to pay this to. It just was something.
Oh, no. As I grew up, Neil, as I say, I grew up in the hood. There were no mafia people around there. The gangsters were the blacks. Were the blacks there. The Peastone Nation and the rest of it.
Jeff Fort, the almighty Peastone Nation, which we'll talk about down the road as well. There's some interesting stories about case fixing around them and their impact on Chicago is huge.
Something I meant to tell you too before about Jeff Fort. I went to Mount Carmel, which is on 64th Street. In the morning and after school, they had police over there at the corner of 64th and Stony for us to get on the bus. Well, that they weren't there when I started wrestling, and I was wrestling from almost from the very beginning. Deegan and myself would have to walk down 64th Street from Dante over to Stony Island, and that was, in fact, Jeff Fort lived right there. He lived in one of those buildings right there. That was the headquarters of the Peastone Nation at that time, and then we had all kinds of, initially all kinds of, run-ins with some of them. Eventually that stopped. But when I was a policeman, I wound up breaking the arm of one of Jeff Fort's girlfriends. That was a real bizarre situation. They were worried about me when I was a policeman that he would do something to me. But what had happened was it was a real strange situation up on Commercial Avenue. Around 92nd Street. They had all kinds of stores there. What somebody was doing was they were breaking those huge stores. These people would leave like pairs of shoes and stuff like that. They advertise them. Somebody was coming by, breaking these huge windows and stealing stuff. They couldn't find the people that were doing it. In fact, they had a couple of squads that were assigned to be there and to be a short distance away and try and catch them, because when it would happen, the alarms would go off, that by the time they would get there, there's nobody around. And this went on for about 3 or 4 months. And the storekeepers were furious because those were very, very expensive windows, and for some reason they couldn't catch anybody. Well, I happened to be working a car one time. I was in the squad. I was about 3-4 blocks away. I heard the alarm go off. And so I raced over there. And when I got there, I couldn't see anybody. I walked around and looked into the alleys, and here they had a couple of these burned out buildings that were there. And it was pitch black. I had a feeling whoever's doing it is running and hiding in here. And you can't see them because it was pitch black. And I walked in there in the alley and I said, "I hear you. Come on out or I'll start shooting." About a minute or two later, here comes a guy and a girl. They were probably about maybe 16, 17 years old. The two of them come walking out. We take them into the police station. There's an upper floor and a lower floor. We take them upstairs and we're waiting up there for the police women to come, because they're going to take him in custody, and they're going to take the girl in custody. She's sitting there lighting matches and throwing the matches, lighting them and throwing them. And she lights one and she throws it at me. I'm doing the paperwork and she throws it on my lap. I said to her, "You do it again and I'll break your arm." She did it again. In my career as a policeman, I think I broke 3. In fact, I know I broke 3 different people's arms. And what I could do is grab them by the hand and just twist. And where your elbow is, it would break that bone. In fact, when I would do it, the hand doesn't go down. It just stops at a certain point. It would go all the way down. But When I grabbed her, I twisted it real quick and broke her arm. And, she starts screaming and crying. Jeff Ford is my boyfriend, and he's going to kill you and this and that. My uncle was the police commander. Marty Ryan was one of my uncles, and he happened to be the watch commander at night, in this particular night. And I go downstairs, and I said to him, I got a problem. What do you mean you got a problem? And I told him what happened. And he was a sharp old timer. He was an interesting character. He says to me, "You should have let her jump out the window. I get an award for saving her life. The papers write it up. She tried to escape by jumping out the window. I grabbed her and saved her life." A real weird situation with Jeff Ford. But no, I never heard from him. Maybe she was lying. But again, the people, the police there were really concerned because, Jeff Ford was a notorious character. And they were worried.
Notorious and very powerful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Back to these high school years. You're on a pathway to university. Are you looking to escape Chicago? Some people have a guided path and others are adrift. What's Bob Cooley's agenda? Is it to go to university and come back to Chicago? In
fact, Marquette was only about 100 miles, a little over 100 miles away. The reason I went there was because they gave me a scholarship. I never planned on going. See, what had happened prior to that, too, at Mount Carmel, every year for the seniors, they had not an exam, but they had it would be an exam that you took, and the top 1/2 of 1% would get scholarships to any private school in Illinois. They wanted the kids all to go to these special classes. You got there at 6:00 in the fucking morning, and whatever. Began, Ballard, and myself, none of us went to those classes. And all three of us took the exam. It was at a girls' school up there. All three of us wound up winning scholarships. All three of us wound up in the top 1/2 of 1%. As part of the scholarship, you had to take these certain classes, genius classes or whatever they called them. And I wasn't going to do that, so I turned that down. I didn't want a scholarship where I had to go in there. And as I told you, I was dating this girl, and my thought was I'll marry her and get a job at the steel mills. Her father makes big money there at the steel mills, and that was my ambition. When I'm contacted by the coach from Marquette, and they offer me the scholarship there, I decide to go to get away. We lived in it was a real bad neighborhood. It was getting worse and worse just to get away from there. And, let's go sing. Let's go. Because I never had a problem with tests or anything else.
Yeah,
I was very lucky.
Tell me about that. Was it easy for you, or did you work hard?
Oh no, I didn't work at all. Same as when I became a lawyer. I never read books or anything. I could remember things. I was fortunate enough where I could read something and could recite it for days and weeks afterwards. I never had a problem with school.
So you had a photographic memory.
Right. I never did my homework. In fact, what we did over at the corner of 64th and Stony, there was a coffee shop. What we do in the morning is, we'd go in there and we grab these other kids that we knew did the homework all the time. We grab them as they're walking by, and we'd copy their homework.
You graduate from Mount Carmel. You get a scholarship to go to Marquette. Sayonara, Mom and Dad. You're happy to leave. At Marquette, you're not taking a real job, but you're running gambling schemes?
I took a job to start with because, had to get some money. The scholarship was fine, room and board, but we didn't get fed on the weekends. The kitchen was closed on the weekends there. So that would have been money we had to get ourselves, and my parents didn't have any money to give me. Began made contact with somebody who worked in the teepee. The teepee was the main store. They used to grab all kinds of leather sweaters and other stuff, and we would sell that on the side. People would contact Began and myself, and if you wanted to get a leather sweater or you wanted to get some other of these other things, quite often they were out of it over at the teepee, but we'd sell it to you for half price.
You guys were grabbing some merchandise and then setting up a side operation.
Yeah, the guy that was, when he was supposed to be bringing the stuff into, from the trucks, when he was supposed to be bringing it in and storing it there, a lot of the stuff he would throw to the side. And, and John would say, we've got this and we've got that. John was the one that would say, we've got sweaters today and we've got shirts today and we've got hats and we've got this and that. I had a couple of guys that, that wanted to run around like they were athletes, and I would sell them a lot of my equipment. I would get the equipment for nothing, and I would sell them. I had the leather sweaters and the rest of that stuff, and I would sell that. But the main money I made was playing cards. I would play cards until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I wouldn't go to school. I wouldn't go to class. And I made a lot of money doing that. I mean, we're talking, when I say a lot, I might make $15, $20 a day. That was a lot of money at that time.
And is this side gig where you're selling jerseys and clothing, is that doing well too? So coupled with those two things, you guys are doing really well.
Well, I was making good money. In fact, with Billy too now, with Bill Murphy, the very first day I was there at Marquette, we got into 3 different fights. They had the breweries real close by. I bought my first suit. It was a wool gray, dark gray, almost looked like it was black suit. I had the suit on the very first day I went to Marquette. I went there wearing a suit, and I bumped into Bill Murphy on the jock floor. He was a football player. We went to the brewery, and they had a deal there where you have to go through like an hour through the brewery, and then you go to a room called the Brown Jug. And there for about a half an hour, they bring you little glasses of beer. And so we go in there, and we're sitting there, and when they finish up, everybody's supposed to leave. But Billy and there was a third person with us. I don't remember. I might have been Bernie Bottom, but there was a third person with us, and we moved to the second room, where they were bringing the new people in. And so they served us drinks again. We did this like 3 times. And the third time when we did it, these guys that were serving us, they were a little bit older than us, but they said, you guys have been here now, 2 or 3 times. Oh, no, it wasn't us. It wasn't us. And when they wouldn't serve us, we get into a physical fight with them. And afterwards, they called security. We went through the back, we went out the back, and they had this fence, these steel fences with barbed wire or whatever in the top. And we clomb over those things. And as I'm jumping down, I ripped my suit. The thing stuck in the back of my suit. And it ripped everything. It ripped it all the way down. I'm running with my underwear, underwear showing. We get on Wisconsin Avenue, and we're now walking towards towards our school. There was a motorcycle gang that was always there by in front of the library, and they start making fun of me and whatever, and we get into a fight with them. We get back to school, and there's a place called Milt's right across the street from school. And we go in there, and we get into a fight there with the boxing team. You might say I arrived there with a bang.
You packed it all in day one. It was all downhill from there, right?
We got involved in all those things, and I did write in the book too. When I finally, said enough is enough with Vegan, that John was like the leader of the group, and they were all committing burglaries and doing all kinds of other stuff. And the only reason I wouldn't do that was because I was afraid that it would break my father's heart if I got caught. I've been arrested a couple of times for fights and stuff like that, but I just wouldn't. I was afraid to do the other stuff. I wouldn't do it.
When you were arrested for these fights, were you given the normal treatment?
Fighting is no big. I mean, okay, it's not like you're robbing a bank or something. I mean, I was just always in fights. In fact, a lot of time I wouldn't take any crap from anybody, and And especially when somebody would give me a little bit of a hard time, bang, I'd whack them and whatever. But
you didn't have a rap sheet that from fighting.
Never got convicted because they had boys' court. There was a Jewish judge, and on one occasion, myself and a couple of others, got arrested again, charged with disorderly conduct, because we were involved in fights, and went before the judge. And what the judge told me was, if I see you in here again, under any circumstances, he said, it's going to be different. And I knew he meant it. And so I'm trying to behave somewhat. I was with, I don't think it wasn't Bill Murphy, but I was with Jim Popjoy and a couple of other people. And we went to a Cubs game. And Jimmy had his father was a politician, and Jimmy had a convertible. We were coming back after the game, and we had been drinking. And when we're coming back, there was a guy in another car that cut us off, or we cut him off, and we're exchanging words with him. And he stops the car. He stops the car in front of us, and he comes out, and I wind up whacking him as he comes running towards us. The girl that he was with jumped on my back. I gave her an elbow. And we get back in the car and we drive off. Well, somebody got the license plate, and they wind up going to his house, and they wanted to know, who the other people, who the guy was in particular. That because I guess I broke the guy's jaw, and they wanted to know who the guy was that quote unquote attacked this guy. And I told him, Jimmy, if you give my name, I'm going to wind up in jail. I said, I'm going to wind up in jail because, it was only like about 3 weeks before the judge had told me, if I see you one. And Jimmy Crowley was an easygoing, a bit overweight, a bit of a fat kid, and an easygoing sort. He wasn't a troublemaker of any sort. But he wound up getting 5 days in jail because he wouldn't tell him who it was. And
when you're at university, what are you studying?
Finance.
Are you enjoying it?
Oh yeah, I mean, finance. I love. I planned on making money. In the summer, I took a job at the Ford plant, working at the Ford stamping plant. My God, was that hard work! And I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to have. This is not something I want to have to do.
Where's
the rest
where's
of my
this
life.
Ford plant, in Chicago or in Milwaukee area?
Oh no, it was in Chicago. The Ford plant, stamping plant. The way I went to work there, my father would drive me there at about. I started work at 6, and he would drive me out there somewhere about, maybe it was a good half-hour ride.
1000 East Lincoln Highway, Chicago Heights.
Yeah, that could be it. Could be it. It's way out there. What I would have to do is hitchhike back home. You go into the place, there's no air conditioning in there. This would be in the summertime. And you go in there, and they have you working on these machines on the assembly line, along with these other guys who have been doing this, for years and years. And they used to enjoy, loading it up so fast and so hard, that we couldn't catch up with them, and there'd be a pile up there, and then we'd get yelled at by the supervisor and the rest of it. And brutal because there was no air conditioning in there. You had all the grease and oil in there that would be, there'd be fumes of that stuff all over.
Yeah. And so this is another experience for you where you're shaping your direction. This is a pathway Bob Cooley is not going down. Bob Cooley is not going to work as a laborer in a factory.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. In a brutal way. And so what's ironic is when I got thrown out of Marquette in my freshman year, we thought we were getting away with it because somebody had gotten us a key to the back door, so we could come in and out. You had rules there. You weren't supposed to be out after 1:00 in your freshman year. If you were, you got punished and you got jugged, as they called it.
You got what does jugged mean?
that means you get punished. You can't leave the dorm. In other words, you have to stay there in the weekends, and and at night you can't leave. You can't even go out after like 7 o'clock. They had some punishment. I thought we were getting away with it because we would go out and we wouldn't come back. We wouldn't come back until 3 or 4 in the morning. We'd go to these strip joints. I go with Beacon and this kid Podesta. And just hang around, and we'd come in through the back door, and the alarm wouldn't go off because we had a key. They had moved us right next to the counselor, into the room right next to the counselor, so he could keep an eye on us. Because we were always doing stupid things. We were plugging up the water, and we just were doing dumb things. And it turned out he was afraid of us for whatever reason, and he didn't report us until he was through at the end of the year. And at the end of the year, he showed us for missing like about 50 bed checks and all kinds of other stuff. Now, when I'm in my sophomore year, I thought I was getting away with all the stuff that we were doing. In my sophomore year, after a short period of time, I started with the card games and the rest of it. We had rented a room right across the alley from our dorm, and we were throwing these parties. What happened when you go to Marquette, and when you first come in there, the freshmen, they have these mixers, they call them, where you're all supposed to meet other people from school and all the rest of it. The apartment that we had was about a block and a half away from the place where they had these mixers. And we had made contact with somebody who worked in the office. He got us the names of all these different girls' schools these girls' colleges that were close by. And what we would do is we would throw these parties. We would go get a barrel of beer. We'd put it in the bathtub. I think we charged $1 for the guys and 50 cents for the girls. All you can drink was the deal. We're talking about a 1-bedroom apartment. We would probably get 100 to 150 people shoved in there to the point where you can barely move. And we're at the front door taking money from all these people as they're coming in. There's no beer left. And oh, yes, there is. You go back there, and it would take them maybe half an hour to go back there. And by that time, we've collected the money from all these people, and we'd leave. But they would still party because others would go get their own stuff. But we were doing this for about a month, every week for a month. And sometimes what I would do is I would stay. There'd be a bunch of people still hanging around there. We're talking about, 3:30, 4 or 5 in the morning. And so on this particular day, and I'm sleeping in the bathtub, everything is out of there. And I've got a pillow. I put a pillow in the bathtub, and there were like 10 people sleeping already in the one room, on the floor and on the bed. And I'm in the bathtub. And this is when people are coming in there and pissing and shitting and everything else. But I'd be drunk and I'd be passed out. And this particular morning, the screen opens up. I open my eyes, and here's a disciplinarian.
Thought you were dreaming.
I knew it was no dream when I saw him. He was a big guy. He's a Carmelite priest. These are Carmelite priests. I'm pretty sure his name was Father Holder. I'm pretty sure that's his name. Here he is standing over me, and he reaches down, and what little hair I have left in my head, he picks me up by the hair, and he says, "I want to see you in my office at 9 o'clock. Right now, it's probably about 6 o'clock. And the reason they were furious was because we were getting bigger crowds in our place than they got at the Marquette Mixer. That's how they realized something was going on. And again, we weren't. I was supposed to be. I was only a sophomore, and I was still required to be in the dormitory because they had the scholarship and the rest of it. And the deal was, they're gonna let me withdraw from school. I lost. They took away my scholarship. So obviously, I'm not going to be. I can't. There's not. I can't afford anything. I'm living now in the apartment that we had. Began was thrown out too at the same time. Gary Podesta was the football player that John was rooming now in the sophomore year, and was rooming with him over at Noonan Hall, at a different hall. His father owned some. What do you call it? Some big grocery stores back in California, and I was going to go to California, I was going to
Are
move.
you remorseful that you're getting removed from the university? Do you put up a fight?
Oh, well, sure.
Are you concerned what
But
your parents are going to say? Or do you just...
I'm not going to go home. I'm not going back. I'm just going to leave. I'm just going to go to California. Now, what's interesting about all this, too, I wouldn't do the robbery they wanted to do when they wanted to rob when Began and Podesta wanted to rob the cleaners across from the library. And I wouldn't do that with them. But now I'm gonna leave. I'm afraid to go home, because of the embarrassment of it, and obviously they'll be upset. So I'm going to go to California.
And you're not going to rob. You don't want to rob the cleaners because that's a bridge too far for you.
Same as I wouldn't commit those burglaries and robberies back there when with Began and those people. These other guys were out doing that all the time. I wouldn't do it.
When you say back there, you meant when you were growing up in high school, they were committing robberies.
Oh yeah, when I moved to Felicitas, yeah. I'm going to go to California. I'm just not going home. I've been kicked out of school for about a week, and I'm just waiting for Gary. Now Gary had not been caught up in anything. Gary was going to be going back to California for a vacation. There was going to be some holiday was coming up or something. And we were going to go back. John and I were going to go back there to California with him and just set up whatever back in California. He claimed his parents were wealthy and whatever, we could stay at their place and move to California. I was about 18 at the time, 18 or 19. So 42, 52. About 1961. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was because of something else that happened. So anyhow, my sister went to Marquette. My sister Pat had a scholarship up there. She was older than me. She had been there for a year before I went up there. I'm sitting there in the apartment. It's about a week or so after I was thrown out of school. There's a knock on the door, and who's there but my father? Son, I want you to come home. I know what happened, I want you to come home. And he took me home. And, and I went back to Chicago. And I remember when I went back, my mother's like yelling at me, how could you have done this? And my father, Stell, please, Stell, because he's worried that, I'll do what I did.
On that ride home, do you recall the conversation? Did your father have a strategy for you?
All he said was, he was said, no, son, what's happened has happened. And, he says, I can maybe understand you acting up, being away from everything and, whatever. But no, he couldn't have been nicer. I think he obviously was afraid that I'd run away. And when I was home and my mother started with that, which is understandable, but, I was getting mad about her constantly yelling at me now. I'm at home and she's yelling at me and, you can't go out and you can't do this and you can't do that. And you get yourself a job now. And I got tired of her yelling at me. So I left. In fact, it was about maybe 4 or 5 days after this. Now I had made contact with John Began, who had been thrown out. John actually came by the house. And he told me, he said, I've got an apartment over there. Why don't you come on down here? And so a day or two later, my father was in the front room. My mother was in the bedroom. And I just packed up a little suitcase and snuck out the back door. And John picked me up and took me downtown.
And so this begins a new chapter in your life. It
was a very short visit down there because I moved in there with him. And what we did for electricity, there was John and another guy that, had the apartment. It was up on the second floor and there was like a fire escape between, these are all those real old buildings there on Dearborn Street. They were old 40, 50 years ago, but they were these brownstones. The way we got our electricity was there were a couple of gay guys that lived across the fire escape from where we were. And what John had done was he had some long electrical cords and he plugged in to their outlet. That's where we got our electricity. And I heard then I heard John and the guys out in the fire escape, and he's saying, "You said it would only be for a day or two. Now it's been that we're going to unplug it." And John's, basically John was. He could make these facial expressions that were really, kind of scary. And he basically said, "Now you rip your eyes out or something if you do." He said, I'm waiting for a check to come in and we'll do it. But you do that and, whatever. He basically threatened them. What is ironic is I got a job working over at the loading trucks at United Parcel. It was a good paying job, but boy, that was rough too. I'm working there for about 10 days, but what I would do after a while was, because the work was so hard, I would load up the truck starting, towards close to the middle, load up like a wall of stuff there. And then every so often, because you got a conveyor belt bringing all the stuff around, I'd sit down and almost fall asleep for a few minutes, because it was so rough. And I got caught. And when I got caught the second time, they fired me. I've got no job. I've got no money. And something else happened. John didn't have any money, and John hadn't paid the rent. The landlord came there, and John wouldn't let him in. And finally, when John walked out, he got into a fight with the landlord, and he punched him. And the landlord called the police. So with that, I grabbed my stuff and I headed back home. I had nowhere to go, so I go back home. My father answers the door, and son, and I said, I decided to come home. And when I come in, my mother said, "What happened this time? What kind of trouble are you in now?" And then my father, "Now, Stell, Bob, come on in.
Your father was a peacekeeper. He knew you.
Oh, yeah.
He knew you had to go out into the world and become a man and find yourself, but he also didn't want to let go, and he knew you were in trouble.
Well, he was just obviously he's worried that I'm going to take off again. When I didn't want the embarrassment of it. I was just going to take off, and my father wanted to make sure that didn't happen. But my mother was pretty smart. She was nobody's fool.
Sounds like
she had to figure. I didn't suddenly just decide to come home at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night.
What happens next?
I come back home, and I get enrolled at Loyola. I get a job. I had about 3 or 4 jobs, and I couldn't keep them because, again, I felt I was a lot smarter than these people I'm working for, and I didn't like taking orders. I'm trying to think. I worked at Metalcraft Corporation. I had a job there. They made picture frames. Before this stuff can be packaged, I'm supposed to inspect it, make sure that it's done right and the rest of it. And I find out after a while they're getting paid more than me. I'm supposed to be a supervisor. I wind up quitting that job. I applied over at Quaker Oats. They were over there in the merchandise mart. And I applied for a job there as a cost accountant trainee. And when I went and applied for the job, I remember there were all kinds of people there. There was a room full of people that came in and applied. And I applied for it, and I lied. And I told them I had more education than I had. My undergraduate, it was finance with accounting, too. Accounting was like my undergrad. But I indicated I had courses I didn't have at Marquette. And when I applied for it, and they gave you a test. And I remember, too, because when I applied for it, I was real friendly with the secretary that was there, older than me and all, but I was talking to her. I was real friendly with her. And I got hired there. They hired me for the job. There were about maybe 20 secretaries or whatever, good-looking women and young girls and the rest of it that were working. And there were about 5 or 6 of us, that were working in the accounting area. And I was in charge of, it was tape and boxes and something else, figuring out how much was used and how much, would have to be ordered or whatever. And all this, this bullshit, little figures here and figures there. And you do all this and you get it all done and you try and do it every day. So it's correct every day. And then At the end of it was at the end of a 28-day period or a 30-day period. You have to check to make sure everything checks out, and it didn't. I'm going over all this stuff to try to figure out what mistake I made, who knows where, and it still didn't. It still didn't register. What eventually happened was they put a wall up there. We were being distracted because of all these females, I guess, and they put a wall up there. So we're like enclosed into an area. Again, I didn't think I was being paid enough and whatever, and I quit that job. I took 2 or 3 other jobs. I got enrolled in Loyola, and I was there for about a year. And then when I wanted to enroll in day school full time, I had to apply all over again. And in my application, they asked, prior universities or schools, and I indicated Marquette, and it said on there, were you ever on athletic or scholastic probation? And I indicated both because I had been. And so they told me that they wouldn't accept me. I wasn't going to be accepted there. So I come home and, tell my dad that, they won't accept me. A couple of days later, my father takes me back to Marquette. He said, I went to Marquette yesterday and I met with Father Holbrook, and he wants to talk to you. So I go back to Marquette and meet him, and he tells me, your father tells me that you've straightened out and you're working hard and you're doing this and you're doing that. And he said, and you want to go to Loyola? And I said, well, I have been there. I've been at night school. I said, but I want to go to day school. And he said, deal was, the thing that was worked out at Loyola was if they would be willing to accept me back there, they would accept me at Loyola. So what Father Holbrook tells me is, well, he said, I'll make contact. He said, I'll make contact with them and I'll tell them we would be willing to accept you back here. He said, but if I was you, I wouldn't apply back here.
When you're sitting in front of this man again, did you feel like you changed and that you understood the gravity of the moment?
Absolutely, because during this time, I had stopped all the other nonsense. I was no longer, hanging out with the others. I wasn't around Vegan at all. I had completely lost touch with him. I stopped, associating with him. I'm about 19 now, and my father's in recruit processing. I forgot one other thing that happened when I was at Marquette. I got arrested on one of the fights that I got into, and I got charged with disorderly conduct, and I had gotten probation. Well, they didn't call it probation, something else. I had that on my record and got arrested on that. There was a bar right across the street. If you were a Wisconsin citizen, you could drink when you were 18. If you were not a Wisconsin resident, you had to be 21. Well, the big party scene was over there at a place called, I think it was called the Vogue. There was a real big bar with a huge area, and that's where everybody would go on Fridays and on Wednesdays. And so I was in there one time with my phony ID. We had phony IDs, indicating we were Wisconsin residents. And the police came in and raided it. And when they raided it, I managed to get out. I was someplace else. I went back over to the teepee. I'm in there. And now it's about 8:30, 9 o'clock. They raided it about 6 o'clock. And it's about 8:30, 9 o'clock. And I figured, well, if I go back there now, they're not going to be coming back. They've already raided it. They're not going to come back. And if I don't come back and go in there and let these people see me, because there's a couple of guys that worked the door, you had to, go through a door check. I figured it's safe to go back. So I went back. They came back. I remember the policeman's name was Callahan. He was the guy that had a foot patrol there. Anyhow, they come back in, and this time they catch me in there, and they take me out, and they put me in a squad. They put me in a squad, and they're going to take me back to the police station. They stopped the car on Wisconsin Avenue. There was an argument. There was some people that were arguing or about to fight in front of us, and the two of them got out to go and break that up, and I got out of the back door, and I just ran away. They came over to the dorm, and when they would call me down from the dorm, and I'd look out the window and see a squad there, I wouldn't come down. But eventually I did, and they arrested me again. I stopped, hanging with those people. I went to work. I went to school. I got a job with an advertising agency, a real good job. And they were paying me something like about $2 or $2.50 an hour, which was, huge money at the time. Most jobs you got paid like $1 an hour, or even less at that time. But it was a real good job, and I could work whatever hours I wanted. In other words, it wasn't far at all from school. That's when my dad suggested, you can take the test. He said they were hiring policemen at the age of 20. You can take the test, and we'll see what happens.
So you're enrolled at Loyola.
I'm at Loyola.
Do you have a desire to become a police officer now?
I never did until the moment he said to me, "Why don't you apply to become I never thought about that. No, because they didn't get paid much. I mean, that was probably why I never. That was not an ambition to be a policeman. They don't get paid spit. But at that time, almost all the police had second jobs, or they were crooked, or they made money there.
Walk me through the next steps. Is your father's suggestion to go into policing exactly what you do? You do take the test?
I took it because it was a good job at the moment for me. And when he did suggest it, initially my thought too was, just to get paid during the summer. When I took the test, I came out in the very top of the test. In other words, they take the people, the top ones first. When I took the test, I came out like in the top 1% of the scholastic. Then when I did the physical too, I was rated one of the tops because I was in fantastic shape physically, and the rest. The only problem I had was I was about 15 pounds underweight. For my size, I was about 6 foot tall. I was supposed to be, I don't know, maybe 150, 160, whatever it was. I was like 15 pounds underweight. When I was at Marquette, I was wrestling 113. After I quit wrestling, I was like close to that. But I had to keep my weight under a certain amount. So I would be starving myself too to stay, like I was. I wrestled like 113. I'm pretty sure that was the weight that I wrestled at Marquette. When I took the test, and it turned out I was in the top 1%, and I could go right away. And it just so happened they were starting a class a week after I got out for the summer at Loyola. And the class was, at the time, 6 or 8 weeks. But it would have worked out perfect because I wouldn't go to night school afterwards. I would just take the summer off from school and go to the police academy and get paid. When I went to the academy, I'd like to get out. I like the excitement of the idea, as the excitement of all of it being a policeman. I remember the first time we went in khakis, and I remember after a couple of weeks, that's when we were to get our weapons. And I remember my dad gave me his gun. He hadn't used in about 20 years. I can remember the strange feeling because I never had a car. I didn't get a car until I was about 20. I was about 22. I didn't have a car. I didn't have any money for a car. And so I remember getting on the bus and going over there to the bus stop. And here I am now wearing a gun. I'm not in a police uniform, but wearing khakis. And here I am wandering over there, but I've got a star. They'd given us a star and whatever. We rode the bus and everything for nothing. And I've got a gun and whatever. And wow. And
but wind me back to this test. So you take the test, you pass the test with flying colors. You're in the top 1%. Do you have a perception that the Chicago Police Department is a entity, a force for good, or is it just a job? When you go in there, are you in your mind entering an organization that is a necessary evil, or is it a altruistic journey to help your common citizen? And I'm just trying to understand, we could talk for days about policing and Chicago policing, but I'm trying to understand at that moment in time, is this a altruistic journey for you and you're entering into an organization that's doing positive things, or is Bob Cooley saying, hey, this is a consistent, steady job, and I know there's some bad stuff going on here? Where's your mindset?
Well, and I'll be honest with you, I never thought in terms of any of that. I mean, to me, it was a job, and it was a lot easier than working at the Ford plant, or even, and it paid better than, at the Metalcraft Corporation and whatever. I began thinking this could be exciting. I always loved danger. That was always my nature. Don't ask me why, but I always loved danger. I wanted to get out there, and I wanted to do a good job, and I wanted to, and my thought was this: I wanted to be the superintendent when I first started. I think he made like $50,000 a year. There was some figure. In terms of a policeman, there are all kinds of policemen. There are the ones that you talked about that want to do the right thing and whatever. You also had certain people like Rick Borelli and some of these others that were gangster types that went in there so they could have a badge and they could steal. I mean, there are certain, hopefully only a small percentage.
Who is Rick Borelli?
Rick Borelli was the first policeman I met. That's a whole story all in itself. When I got transferred up to the 18th district, this is after I almost got killed on the south side, and when that happened, and I got out of the hospital finally, they wouldn't let me go back to work because I was still, my left hand was still in bad shape, and I was still not in the best of physical shape. And so what I started doing was I started going to the north side when I was, when I was supposed to be at home. I was not on the medical, but I would go to the north side. And one of the kids I met in police academy, Tony Corzantino, he was a vice detective there in the 18th district, and I would hang with him. He was working undercover, and I would do undercover work with him. I would go with him, when he was attempting to buy narcotics and a lot of other stuff. And I was getting into fights with some of these people when they would attack us. And I got to meet a lot of the other policemen there because, I wasn't supposed to be there, but I was there at night because it was giving me something to do. I would go drinking there with Tony, and then I would go out and do police work with him. Tony was a real tough kid too. In fact, I started running around with Tony. He was a real tough Italian kid who was straight as an arrow. Anyhow, and I got to, in fact, I met the commander. I met Commander Brash was the commander who eventually got indicted. But I had met him because I was introduced to him by one of the sergeants who was telling me, this is, Bob Cooley. He said, he told him, he's a policeman out there in 4th District, but he's been, he's on the medical, but what he's been doing, he's been helping us tremendously here. When I finally went back to work at 4th District, the commander requested that I come to work there, to work in the 18th. That was Rush Street. He requested that I come. Would you want to work narcotics? I said, oh, I'd love it. He puts in for a transfer for me to come out there, and I go to the 18th district, and I go to work with one of the sergeants. The first day I'm there, I go out there. I'm hanging around Old Town and whatever, and the sergeant tells me, well, he says, Bob, he says, now, if and when you find something or somebody approaches you or whatever, or you see some illegal things going on here, the bars are doing something illegal, you don't make an arrest. What you do is you contact me. You contact me before you do anything, and you don't talk on the radio. You just call and say, meet me, and we'll handle it from there. And I know why. I know what these guys are doing. I've seen that when I was there. And, I can just see that, obviously these people are all on the payroll. I said, no problem. And when I come in that night, when I finish up, it's about 6 o'clock when I come back in, the lieutenant is there, and I had seen him a number of times before, but never talked to him. And he said, listen, he says, Bob, he said, no, we had lockers there. We had lockers up on the second floor. He said, once a month, he said, there'll be something in the locker for you. That's for you. And I said, there'll be something. He said, yeah, there'll be a little package in there for you. And I said, Lieutenant, I said, no, that's okay. I said, Lieutenant, I'm in law school. I'll be finishing up. I don't want anything. I don't want anything. But I said, thank you for the offer, but I don't want anything. But okay. The next day, I come into work, and they tell me you've been transferred back to uniform, and I know why, and I don't care. I'm not getting involved in this stuff. The next day is a Saturday, it's a Sunday. The next day is a Sunday. I go to roll call there, and the captain, who has the roll call, indicates that, you'll be in car such and such. And when I go to the car, here's the policeman I'm going to be with. His name is Rick Borelli. He's an Italian guy, tough looking. And hi, how are you? And we're in the car. And when we're in the car, it's what they call it was 1850, which is what they call a cover car. It just covers. It's a 2-man car, one of the few 2-man cars in the district. And whenever there's problems or whatever, any place, and they put in a call for assistance, that's where you're going to be going. And I meet him, and the next thing I know, we're playing cards in there. We're playing gin in there for money and whatever, and we start talking, and we really hit it off. And he's the one that got me started then with, he turned out to be a mobster. He was connected with Marco and all those people, so.
Mobster first, cop second, or a cop first, then becomes a mobster?
Oh, mobster that uses the cop, it uses the fact he's got a gun and a star to go out and commit criminal activities.
So one of these characters that joins the force already in the mob and basically becomes an inside man, if you will.
And
Trojan horse.
They do it so they can legally carry a gun. In fact, that's, people like Hanhart, that's how they picked up these burglars and turned them over to these guys so they could kill them. He's the one who had those burglars that were involved in Arcardo's house. He's the one who had them arrested and turned them over to the mob guys so they could kill them. As Butchie told me, that I said, I'm talking with Butchie, Harry Elliman's partner, the other top hitman, and I said, gee, how could those guys have been so stupid to have been, grabbed one after the other? And he said, what are you going to do when somebody comes in and says you're under arrest and puts the handcuffs on you? And he told me Hanhart took care of that.
Was it common knowledge that Hanhart was on the take? It was like the worst kept secret?
No, not until, I wrote about that in the book too. When I first met with those, FBI agents over at the motel, we met at a motel over there in Countryside. I said to them, there was 3 FBI agents, and there was Gary Shapiro in there, a couple of other U.S. attorneys.
Being a prosecutor,
he was the head of the strike force. He was the one I first went to see when I wanted to cooperate. And when I met them at the motel, I said to them, you people have been exposed from day one. What are you talking about? I said, your the liaison between you guys and the police department, I said, is Hanhart, Commander Hanhart. And he said, what about him? And I said, he's the mob's guy. I said, he's the one that meets all the time with Pat Marcy. I said, and he's the one that is giving them all the information. He was the one that the FBI contacted with the police department to give them all to work with them.
And what's Shapiro's reaction to this?
Well, it wasn't. I wasn't talking to Shapiro. I was talking to the FBI agents. Shapiro was just sitting there, and when I said to him, I said, this guy is our, well, I probably use the term our guy, because I have been partners with Johnny and part of the First War. I said, he's been our guy, and he's the liaison you guys use. And he said, how do you know that? I said, I just know it. I said, and he's as corrupt as can be. He's been passing all this information back to all these mob people. And the agent said something to me, you don't like him, do you? And I said, not. I said, obviously not. And he said, is that why you're making up this stuff about him? It turns out this guy was a close friend of his who had been dealing with him for years. And I'm the one who gave them the information. Remember, Hanhart was the one that eventually got indicted because he was part of the jewelry robbery ring and the rest of it. But, then they wind up indicting him. But I never saw that agent again. I became friends with a lot of these agents. I mean, like real close friends were, even after I left and I finished up, where I would still, be talking to them constantly. And they would want to meet up with me. When they heard I was going to be around, they would want to come just to hang around with me because they were so happy with what I was doing, and they realized what I gave up to be doing what I'm doing. This guy, it was the way you said it too. Is that why you're making up this stuff about him? But one of the other agents told me this was a personal friend of his. But here's what's interesting about all that: Hanhart, on dozens and dozens of occasions, would be sitting there at the First Ward table with Pat Marcy in full uniform.
This is out in the open.
Yeah, I mean, in full uniform. We're talking about that, noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and not just once or twice. He would be there probably once a week, maybe twice a week, and he'd be sitting there at the First Ward table with the squad car parked in front.
This is a establishment which has notoriously been under surveillance by the feds.
Everybody knows that it's Pat Marcy, the mob. They had taken over the entire political system, not just in Chicago, but the state of Illinois. When they took over the First Ward Democratic Organization, they took over all the elections to begin with. That was the first thing they did. All the elections were taken over by the First Ward. Everybody reported to them. The city is not run by the mayor. The city is run by the city council.
That concludes this portion of the conversation. Stay locked in for what's next. You'll be hearing about Bob's years as a cop, a horrific accident that nearly kills him, and how this accident puts him on the path to becoming a lawyer.